Hello and welcome to the next video presentation by Mayors Teaching Institute. The topic we will be discussing today is disaster management. Now, as we're talking about disaster management, this presentation is going to be covering up the following topics. But obviously, we need to understand what is a disaster and what are its types. We need to understand the effects, the impacts of this disaster on all our human life. And as we're talking about disasters, disaster management and the disaster management team and their role they play is important to understand. Once we understand the nature and the extent of a disaster, it also helps us understand how we should prepare ourselves to deal in a situation of a natural or a man-made disaster. The first aid kit that one should have at home and that one should keep in precautions of such kind of disasters. What are the kind of emergency actions that happen? And last of all is a mock drill. As we start with this topic, it is important to understand what is a disaster. Variously dangerous events occur many times in the environment. All those kind of situations are called as disasters. Some of the main natural disasters are floods, both wet and dry famines, cyclones, earthquakes, and volcanoes, to name a few. These are all of a sudden troubles to mankind. Such events cause sudden changes in the environment and thereby cause the damage to it. Environment is also damaged due to the use of natural resources for our development. This leads to a sudden disaster unexpected to humans. These are called as man-made disasters. The United Nations has defined a disaster as a sudden event that leads to a huge loss of life and property. The words like huge and sudden are very important in this definition. As a disaster occurs suddenly, it cannot be predicted. Hence, precautions sometimes are not possible. Huge due to the loss of life and property. Various areas like the economic, social, cultural, political, law and administration, etc. are affected by it. The life in a particular area is drastically disturbed. There is loss of life, property, people's calmness, peace of mind, jobs, economic criterial problems, everything that follow. So thus, we are trying to understand what are the reasons behind these disasters, what are the causes of these disasters, and what are their types. As we look into this table, we are seeing there are three major kinds of disasters: the geophysical, man-made, and biological. As we see, man-made disasters are very, very known to all of us. Some of them are the internationally famous wars, terrorist attacks, rapes, child labor, women and children trafficking, bomb blasts, that is, even forced migration is about the trafficking scenario. These are all common disastral problems. They may not affect a large population at one time, but still they can cause the death of a large number of people and traumatically affect the mindset, stability, and peace of many others over the world. The others, which are unknowns, would be something like poisonous gas leaks that have happened all over the world through the Chernobyl incident with radioactive material, through the Bhopal gas incident in India, and to very currently the event that happened in Vizag from the polymer industry. These are all some kind of gas leaks that have affected people over the world. And similarly would be the coronavirus. Even though there are some who say it is a man-made virus from Wuhan, some say it as a natural mutation. But we do not know the exact scenario yet, as I'm giving you this presentation, with the real answers not yet out to the world. But what is important to understand is that small mistakes by men, when I say men, I mean both man and woman, it is an implication that we are a part of this disaster. The other would be the biological disasters, plant disasters, the forest fire, weeds that can affect water bodies, algal blooms in the water that reduce the oxygen capacity in water, hence affecting other life forms. These may not be disasters that directly or indirectly affect us, but they are there. They are affecting other animals, they are affecting other plants. The great fires of the Amazon and the great fires of Australia, which have happened in the very beginning of 2020 and towards the end of 2019, were clear indications of how certain biological disasters have led from forest to destroy life of both plants, animals, and increase the pollution capacity over the world. Animals. Obviously, infections of viruses where the corona comes in to the playway, HIV, the Spanish flu, and all from the past have been such kind of great pandemics over the world that have created havoc. These disasters do not lie down at just a small level, but these disasters are growing day by day. They are manifesting in a larger quantity over the world. We may not be able to see them because they are the invisible enemies. Okay. And the last is the geophysical, which is the most common thing that we think of when we talk about a disaster. Something related to Earth. The geological disaster would be something like an earthquake, a tsunami, a landslide. Okay, land erosion because of walking of these cows and all against the hills that erode the soil, they make the soil loose, and therefore it makes landslides more possible. These kind of scenarios are growing step by step, and they're growing daily. We are not observing them today, but the years, generations down the line are going to see it even worse. Atmospheric conditions. Atmospheric conditions like obviously cyclones, extreme floods, rains, hailstorms, snowfall excessively, sometimes no snowfall due to the global warming conditions, melting glaciers because of the heat. Okay, though melting glaciers could be a part of the geological criteria, but it's affected by the environmental conditions. And very commonly, when I think about this, as I'm a person from India, Mumbai, I think about a time period during my childhood when I hardly even heard about cyclones in Mumbai. Probably it would be once in 2 years or once in 3 years that we would hear someone saying, "Oh, there's a cyclone in Mumbai." As I grew and I started understanding, there were more things that we realized. There was something like a cloud burst that happened, the 2006 cloud burst. And like that, we have had incidents. And today, when we look at Mumbai, the very last year, 2019, seen almost 3 to 4 cyclone attacks during the monsoon period. It was something never common. And we are seeing these kind of disasters growing every day. Yet we fail to realize how much we have affected this earth and how much earth is coughing in our face. Thanks to the coronavirus, we have come to this realization to help the earth improve in some or the other way. At least these disasters could make us realize, and coronavirus being the guiding force, make us realize the mistakes we humans have been making. The effects of a disaster. And now that we have understood what are the kinds of disasters, it's important to understand how serious the effects of such disasters can be. Collapsing of bridges, flooding of villages and cities, shortage of food, lack of water, the cases of Africa, collapsings of houses, developing cracks in the land because of earthquakes, forest fires, droughts, adversely affected environments, clearly indicating the kind of disasters we have and the disasters we're headed for. Disasters definitely affect the economy of a nation predominantly. That effect is always relative. That is, if any port is destroyed, there is a long-lasting effect on the economics of that area. And until its reconstruction is done, the expenses incurred, then to restart that port again. An effect of a disaster on social leadership is that the local leader, if not strong, the citizens become confused. They start running helter-skelter. Something like the scenario right now in India. Though people are guiding, though people are instructing the citizens what to do, there are some people who are not able to understand what the governments are telling them. Sadly, we cannot blame the government fully because we also have a lot of people who are illiterate. And we are stuck between the realm of whether it is a lack leadership or whether it's illiteracy that's affecting us. Because people are just traveling. They're running helter-skelter for food, for water, for clothing, for shelter, for their houses, for their families. They're walking distances. They're traveling places. But We have to keep calm. We have to give them the assurance to understand. As much as what we understand from the government who speak in mostly English or Hindi, it's important that we talk to these people in their own regional languages, help them understand what the government is doing for them. It is for their good and for the benefit of everybody. Now, as we find that disasters have affected all of us, the more incorporated expenditure is in the rescue and rehabilitation and the reconstruction of the damaged area. Leave aside just the damage done to the local area because of the disaster, but I'm talking about the post disaster expenditure as well. All concerned departments of the government will be affected by a disaster. And we can see this today. There is the economic department who's fighting ends to match the economy up for the country and the world. There is the health ministry who's fighting on a different scale. The armed forces, the police forces, the doctors, the governances, the MLAs, the ministers, every department is shaken by one coronavirus disaster. Now, what is the nature and the scope of a disaster? Some of the important facts to understand: that there are 6 major phases. The pre-disaster phase, where we analyze what kind of a disaster is coming. Had China warned us earlier, as the media says, we would have known much more earlier to protect ourselves from the coronavirus all over the world today. But that's something similar, like the current cyclones that happened in Bengal. Because we knew that the cyclones were coming, there was a warning phase introduced where we warned the people. The emergency phase was brought in where immediate decisions were made, rehabilitation of the people who were in the coastal area to a much more secured place. And once the damage is done, recovery and reconstruction of that area so that people can return back to their homes. These are the 6 important ways in which the government has looked upon disasters, the nature and their scope. The government has taken into consideration the nature and the scope in only 3 key aspects, which are most important for citizens. The first aspect is the phase of emergency. It is an important character of this phase that maximum lives can be saved by quick action during this phase only. Various actions like search and rescue operations, medical assistance, first aid, restoring communication services, removing of people from affected areas, and understanding the gravity of the situation coming up is done during the phase of emergency. During the transitional phase, rehabilitation work starts in this phase. After the subsidence of the disaster, then includes the clearing of all debris, restoring of water supply, repairing of the roads, housing, etc. to bring back normalcy. Rehabilitation of the victims is an important aspect. Generally, different institutions offer monetary and other type of help to such people. It helps to soothe the mental stress at the earliest if the victims are offered with a permanent means of earning a livelihood. And this is true rehabilitation. The reconstruction phase. It's a highly complicated phase. This phase begins with the transitional phase. People reconstruct their buildings, the facilities, roads, water supply, everything has to be restored. Farming practices have to restart. However, this process takes long because it is based on the mindset of the people who are ready and willing to undergo this whole change after the disaster. And thus, as planet Earth has experienced many natural disasters, most of the disasters are related to unprecedented situations that have been occurring in the continent of Asia and in the region of the Pacific Ocean. Huge loss of life and the planet Earth has been occurred due to such disasters. Generally, such conditions of natural imbalance have been arisen due to greed of economic progress of human being at the cost of natural resources. In reality, old problems of several years have become more fierce. Example like increasing population. And as population increases, their needs increase. And with this, there is no extreme end to this problem. Such disasters have increased after the World War II. And this has increased inequality in terms of economics and standard, racial and religious differences, and other political turmoiled situations. Incidences like terrorism, abduction, social differences have become so common today that even though human rights exist, many of us do not receive it. Another threat to human being is the use of atomic energy. Atomic energy, examples like the radiation leaks from the Chernobyl blasts in Russia, the Fukushima incident of Japan, and many other radioactive testings that have happened over the years. The atomic energy plant, which is used only for electricity generation today, is a very good source, but if not managed properly or if with carelessness and there is a radiation leak, that's enough to destroy not just the locality, but the city, state, and country at large. Hence, direct participation of citizens in disaster management is highly necessary. Similarly, disaster management schemes have come up with respect to local, time, and nature related disasters. Like we all know, in East India, the Brahmaputra River is known for its flooding, with the highest flooding in the world every year. It's a very local problem. And the disaster management has taken an effort to train the people what to do every time the flood comes so that it minimizes loss of life and damage to property. Overall, there may be many types of disasters, and one would have to overcome. We would face newer ones as time comes, but we have to all learn to be ready, to be prepared. And therefore, disaster management is the next that flows in. The disaster can be minor or major, short time or long time, but it should be overcome with an effective, appropriate way with minimum loss of life and property. Disasters occur very fast, and we have to be pre-prepared to prevent the disaster. Disaster management is achieving or time to time trying to improve the ability to face disasters through scientific and careful observations and analysis of data. For example, preparing the action plan through study of various aspects like preventive measures, rehabilitation, reconstruction, execution of plans. But the management of disaster has somewhat been able to be successful and not so successful in certain criteria. But still, a few points have been jotted down for a pre-disaster management and a post-disaster management. In the pre-disaster, we have to identify the kind of disaster that we are going to be facing. Then we have to try to understand what kind of information, how intense is the disaster. Like we understood that the cyclone is going to affect us, but with what intensity? It's coming at 165 to 185 kilometers per hour. That was the intensity. How much hazardous is it going to be? How bad is it going to affect the people? How much inland is it going to come and destroy our habitats? Therefore, special training management teams have been put out in the local areas to instruct the people, to create awareness, to move, to rehabilitate people for that time period, to prevent the loss. Yes, we do know that that very day when the cyclone happened in West Bengal and Odisha, nearly 72 people died. And I think it's still wonderful that the disaster management was able to reduce that value down. Had we not known about the disaster, had we not prepared ourselves, had we not rehabilitated people, I don't know what kind of loss we would have seen therefore. Now, once the disaster has happened, the post-disaster, we have to take a list of all the victims, see where they were, how much of their lives are affected. We have to understand how to get them to go back to their homes, how to look after their homes, establish a help center for them to undergo certain counseling if they are mentally affected by the situation, categorize them, develop a control center, deliver materials to them so that they receive their constant food and shelter for some time period, and try to keep everyone prepared for disaster in the future. Now, there is a certain cycle, a management cycle that the disaster management team has developed, starting with the preparation. The plan is prepared to minimize the destruction by any disaster. Obviously, we want to prevent the disaster from rising. Then plan to minimize the damage from them, and that's a part of redemption. Then preparedness. A plan is chalked so that we can get a quick response from the general public, so that we can get people to understand the scenario, how fast it is, and try to be able to make them move, rehabilitate, and come back to help prevent the damage to such people's lives. And we can prevent and protect them from the disaster. Impact of the disaster, trying to understand what kind of intensity is the disaster going to be bringing on them. Response. Response to the disaster is to be done with immediate effect. The factor is followed by the disaster strike in the cycle. Resurgence. Resurgence is an important link between the emergence and the national progress. Resurgence is a stage, resurrection is a stage used for the welfare and the rehabilitation of the nation. It involves even the government's role in how they are handling this kind of a scenario. And finally, restoration, where we bring back everything to normality so people can go back and live their lives as usual. The very next part I'm going to be talking about is some of the authorities at different levels. We can see from this chart that not just some local people, but including the Prime Minister, takes a major role in understanding what is to be done with disaster. About a disaster, the information is given by the Prime Minister to the Chief Minister, to its collector of a particular state or district, to the Tahsildar of a particular taluka, or to the Sarpanch, the managing committee of a particular village, who has to instruct his people or get information from his people about a particular affected area. Organizations, social and private companies, warning bodies, disaster management organizations will be discussing with the collector, chief minister, and prime minister the gravity of the situation and understand what kind of role should be taken under such a particular disaster. Finally, the decisions made by the prime minister, chief minister, and collector will be put out to the Tahsildar and the Sarpanch, who will execute the plan. Once the plan is executed, the collector will overlook the execution of this plan in terms of what kind of rehabilitation is done, what kind of resources are being made available to the people. So this is done in order to make sure that everybody understands that the Prime Minister also takes a decision when it comes to the disaster management. This image is an image that I'm putting out to you all to just take a little thought and think what kind of scenarios would be disastrous and what kind of prevention would you take in A, B, C. Just a thought process. It's a question to you all, rhetorically left to you all to think. Like in the first is an earthquake, second is forest fire or burning house, and third is a snake bite. What is a disaster? Which kind of disaster would you classify it as a major disaster and minor disaster? And what kind of precautionary measures would you take? It's a thought process. Below it, I've put three symbols: flammable liquid, flammable gas, and explosive. These are important markings done on certain bottles, chemical boxes, gas supplies, our petroleum trucks. These are symbols of importance, and we oftenly overlook them, thinking that, array, they are not so important. But trust me, they are very, very important. Very, very important. That's the reason why certain gas cylinder bursting happening at houses and all is very common, because people do not know the meaning of these kind of symbols. And I'm going to put a question right at the end of this presentation for you all to make a list of the different symbols like this and to take out what is the meaning of each of these symbols and find out where they are used and what kind of chemicals may be flammable, may be dangerous, may be explosive, may be corrosive. Okay, so we need to understand this. Moving on next. When a person is injured, what kind of ways can you carry a person? You just can't carry a person randomly. You may probably choke the person. You may probably harm some other body part of the person. You may probably crack some bone in the person's spine if you carry the person improperly. Therefore, points A, B, C, D, E, and F are showing you some of the different ways in which one could lift a person in a very appropriate way without causing the person too much of harm. So in important situations, various transportation methods like the cradle method, carrying on the back, carrying on two hands are to be followed. Those methods depend upon the condition of the victim. And thus, as we face different types of major and minor disasters in our daily life, varieties of disasters like accidents, stampedes, injuries in fighting, electric shocks, burns, heart shocks, snake bite, dog bite, fire due to electric shock circuit, epidemic of any disease, etc., they're happening around us. Victims of a disaster need to be offered some primary help before actual medical treatment, and therefore the first aid box is necessary. And some of the things you will need in your first aid box is what I've listed here. The first aid material are essential materials for all of us to have. Such material must be available at any given time. It is important to use and keep this for any emergency, whether it's for our own personal emergency or for the emergency use for others. The last point that we will be talking about is about mock drills. It is a practice to check the preparedness of facing a disaster as early as possible. Virtual apparent situations of a disaster are created to check the reaction time of any type of disaster. Trained personnel would observe their responsibilities to check the execution of the plan designed for disaster redressal. This, help, this helps to check the efficiency of the system being prepared during a disaster redressal. Now, when we all travel on a ship or go on a cruise for a holiday, before we go to the boat to take our rooms, we are all taken for a training session where different kinds of whistles and signaling indications are told to people when to wear the life jacket, when to wear a particular uh, coat, where to move if you hear a particular type of bell pattern. And on the basis of that, you are made aware of any kind of emergency situation on the ship and what measure should you take in order to avail a good life without dying to a wrong scenario. And therefore, some objectives were made: evaluating the response, improving the coordination between people and the disaster management system, identifying one's own responsibilities and abilities, improving the ability to quick response to disaster, checking the complementary or the competency of a planned action, and identifying the possible errors and risks. And thus, a lot of movements carried out by children today to help us build an awareness about good, clean environments, disaster free environments, an environment where we are moving away from the global warming and more in nature friendly approaches. As I leave you all on this presentation, I want you all to think of a few scenarios. Like in this particular concept chart, I would like you all to think, if you were faced with a particular disaster, what kind of scenarios would you see? For your help, we have filled the environmental, economic, medical, and administrative ideas. What kind of social and what kind of political changes do you think would occur? On similar lines, I would like you to think, what are the objectives of a first aid kit? What are the things you need that, or why do you think a first aid kit is necessary? What are the properties of disaster management? I would like you to fill this. I've already put it somewhere down in the presentation, but just a little formal thought in a concept chart. And last of all, I've given you a various lineup of almost 9 more symbols. Think about these answers, find where these symbols are, what their uses, and answer it for yourself. Be ready, be prepared. The disaster can come anytime. Thank you for watching our channel. Please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.